Hello and welcome to Rich Rides. This week I'm lucky enough to be on the brand new 2019 Suzuki Katana. So it would be impossible to do a review of this bike without talking about the looks. It has sort of 80s retro inspired looks and it really works in my opinion. So everything from the dashboard, that's an LCD dashboard that could be right out of the 1980s, sort of the fonts, everything. It's fantastic. It looks like the dashboard of Kit from Knight Rider. So that works for me. It's got loads of hints back to the original Katana. So things like this massive Suzuki in red down the side, the sort of sword slash cut tank, the headlight that is such a signature point of that original bike. So the beauty is, it's a modern bike though. It's just got hints of the old. It's not trying to be an exact replica. For me that works really well, and I think it's a bold move by Suzuki as well to, instead of doing a sort of 60s 70s inspired bike like a lot of the retro bikes out there are, to go for an 80s bike. So my first impressions, having been on the bike for around an hour, that it's fantastic. There's not many bikes I get onto and instantly feel at home at, and I did with this. Normally it takes me a while to adjust, especially because I'm coming from an adventure bike. If I then go to something more sporty, it takes me a while to adjust, but with this I didn't. It's strange, it's got that certain quality. Talking of quality, then the whole thing feels solid, well designed, well put together. So Suzuki have done an amazing job, I think. The other thing that surprised me about this bike is how easy it is to ride. When you look at the headline figures, sort of 150 horsepower, I think it's 120 newton meters of torque, and you can really feel that torque as well from low down. You half expect it to be a bit of a handful, but it's not at all. Like I say, I got straight on it and instantly rode it nicely. So seating position is actually really comfortable. So you sit quite upright, just a little bit forward, so slightly on your wrists, but your knees are bent a bit, but not too bad, and the pegs are pretty much underneath your hips, so comfortable. I'm 6 foot tall and I fit it nicely. My legs grip the tank well and are pressed in quite a lot against that, so there's a little bit of protection there as well. Then things like the Practicality, then dashboard's really good. Yes, there's a lot of information on it, but your important stuff is big and bold, so that's easy to see. Switch gears, as you'd expect. It also has sort of different modes that you can go through, different information. Everything else is pretty much as you'd expect. Something it doesn't have are different rider modes. It actually, rather than it being a ride-by-wire throttle, it's a cable, and I actually quite like that. It works well. I'd read some initial reviews of the initial sort of, I think they're the pre-production bikes, saying it had a snatchy throttle, but I've not found that at all. It's just it's just not, basically. So whether they changed from pre-production bikes to the actual production models, I'm not sure, but I find the throttle to be brilliant. Another practical things, mirrors, I think they look cool, they're sort of in keeping with the style, and they work brilliantly, so they're quite far enough out, not really getting any shoulder or elbow, so yeah, they work brilliantly. So to the brakes on this, at the front it has Brembos, on the rear it's got a Nissan caliper. Brakes work really well, both front and rear. Sometimes rear brakes aren't great, but these are. Like I say, the front brake is a Brembo, and as you'd sort of expect, it's superb. So not grabby, really progressive, really strong. So everything you want from a brake. Onto the performance, and as you'd expect with its 150 horsepower, it's pretty rapid. So wind protection, there's not much. This bike is the Samurai optional extra kit on it, which gives lots of carbon fibre bits, but also gives it this screen, which I must say actually does give you some protection. I wasn't sure it would, but even at sort of higher speeds, then it does redirect the airflow. Obviously you've got some with it being a naked bike, but it does actually protect you quite well. There's no fairings as such, it's all sort of tank and sort of front end. But that will keep a bit, it certainly keeps the wind off your knees, and if it's keeping the wind off, it should keep a bit of rain off as well. So onto the suspension, it has KYB adjustable front forks, and I think it's a KYB adjustable rear as well. So this section of road is particularly bumpy, and this is soaking up the bumps nicely, so suspension does work well even on this really rough stuff. It is fairly firm, it's definitely on the firm side, but it's not uncomfortable and you don't feel it jarring, and there's no vibrations or anything. So engine, performance, gearbox, those kinds of things, it's a absolute hoot. Something I didn't talk about before was the seat height. It's fairly low. I'm easily flat-footed and with my knees bent, so it should be fine for riders of all sorts of heights. Also seems to have a low centre of gravity, although it's a fairly heavy bike. I think it's something like 210 kilos. It doesn't feel that at all. I think that's because all the weight is so low down. So I've just filled up with fuel, and it's, even with a full tank, is only giving a range of 112 miles. So for touring that could end up being a bit of an issue. You just have to refuel a lot more than you'd expect. For normal use it's probably fine, but as I say, it's just something to bear in mind for touring, and if you do a lot of that. So at these motorway speeds, then yes, there's wind as you'd expect on a naked bike, but I do think that fly screen helps a bit, and also if I crouch down slightly, it's slightly better anyway. But it's certainly clean air and nothing worse than you'd expect. So on to my 3 positives about this bike. The first is how smooth, torquey, just generally this engine, how easy it is to ride. So that's the big first one. The second one is the looks. Some people will love them, some people will hate them. I think it's really good what they've done. So it's not just the looks, it's the whole ethos of the bike really, that let's take an 80s idea but have a thoroughly modern version of it. So that's the second one. And the third is just how easy it is to ride and how unintimidating. As I said before, then 150 horsepower motorbike, 1000cc, it can be quite a handful. If you think about things like the MT10, then they're an absolute lunatic, and they're fine if you're just gunning it, but when you want to ride normally, they're not great. Where this, you can ride it just normally, you don't have to ride it like a loony. And when you do wind it up, the power is just very linear, so there's no peaky power. It's got enough torque down low, and it just keeps that sort of wave of torque throughout the whole rev range. So on to any negatives about it. As usual, struggling. Being picky, then yes, the tank could do with being a bit bigger. Depends on the type of riding you do, but sort of 120 miles to a tank of fuel isn't a lot really. On my sort of V-Strom, I know that's a very different type of bike, but I can get 250 on that. Any other negatives? No, not really. I think maybe for the price a quick shifter would have been nice, but there are plenty of other bikes at this price that don't have a quick shifter, so don't think it's a showstopper that. But yeah, I'm really struggling for negatives. So in summary, I think it's a superb bike. It goes well, it stops well, it goes around corners well, it just does everything really, really well. I think it sounds superb. So yeah, I definitely think it's a contender for anyone looking for a good, fun bike. So price wise, it's just over £11,000. This has the optional samurai kit, which has lots of sort of carbon fibre goodies and this screen, as in fly screen, not LCD, and a few other bits and pieces. Like I say, it's got a red seat and all these things, and that extra pack is £999. But for me, I think I'd just get the standard, and I think I'd get this colour rather than the black too. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to York Suzuki. They're the Suzuki main dealer for the York area. They have a huge selection of bikes there, every sort of Suzuki model that you can think of, from sport stuff up to V-Strom's adventure bikes and down to scooters even. As well as the new motorbikes, they do have some used stock too, and they have a well-stocked parts and accessories department. It's also worth popping in just to have a nosy at some of the classic bikes they have on show there. They've got a real selection. I think it's one of the guys' private collections, but it's well worth going just to have a look at those. So that's it for this week. Hope you found that useful. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you again next week.